with all the focus on bedding areas, even going back to 10, 15 years where people are actually talking about making a deer bed. I actually heard someone say that they could go down to Texas brush country and create a buck bed and attract every buck in the area to that bed because of those 7 secrets of a buck bed, whatever it might be. There's been so much focus on buck beds that people forget that deer are food focused 5 times in a 24-hour period. They're rhythmic pattern feeders. That's not something for me. John Azoga taught me that a long time ago. It's like rhythmic pattern feeders like a baby. They feed every 2 hours, every hour, every 3 hours. And so what you find is that bucks, does, fawns, they have to feed 5 times in a 24-hour period. So without food, without that focus of food every day, even the best bedding areas in the world are vacant because the deer that would be bedded in those areas have to relate to food. So if you're out there, you're a new hunter, you're an old hunter, maybe this helps put things in perspective, but you find the food, you will find the deer. And I want you to relate to that. And in finding these food, it doesn't matter if it's public or private land. We're just talking hunting in general, just deer hunting in general. So if you're watching this video, this channel for the first time, we talk whitetail strategy. And this is a huge strategy for all the basis of deer movement, finding big bucks on public land, building it on private land. You have to base everything on food because that is a foundation of movement. I've been to many properties, over 1,100 properties in 26 states, 25 states, whatever it is, since 2005. Not to mention hunting in many states myself, public land every year, at least 1 or 2 states, multiple states usually. But if you relate everything you do with whitetail back to food, you're going to find success. But there's a few key components that you need, whether you're a young hunter or an old hunter, and you're trying to learn how to hunt or try to improve your hunt, trying to change what you do, trying to find a better level of success. If you relate that back to food, you're going to find success. Again, deer feed 5 times in a 24-hour period as rhythmic pattern feeders. And what I mean by that is you have this food source. All these deer, from mature bucks to little bucks, young bucks, does, they're all relating to this food right in the bullseye every single day. Typically, does are within 100 yards, little bucks, young bucks are within a couple hundred yards, and mature bucks might be 300 to 500 yards away from that major food source. But that's their afternoon food source. I refer to that as number 3. Number 1 and 2, they're feeding back in their bedding areas. They want browse. They have to have browse. That's why people say, well, the deer are out in the corn right now. The corn hasn't been cut. Deer aren't living out in a cornfield unless they're forced to be. They don't want to feed during the daylight on corn all day. We can't do it. They can't do it. Corn's hard to digest for us and them. In fact, if you go out and put corn, and this has happened, you put corn out for deer because they're starving in February, and they feed on that corn, it's going to kill them. Unless they've been feeding on corn the whole time, but they wouldn't be starving if they've been feeding on corn the whole time. So you introduce that corn to them, it rots in their stomach, it attacks their central nervous system, creates a toxin, kills them. They usually die in April or May when they leave that winter time. Corn is hard to digest. Same with acorns in the woods. They can't just feed on acorns all day. People say their acorns are dropping. It all boils back to, if you're not seeing deer because you think it's corn or acorns, it's probably because your land has been overpressured and overhunted. Those are quality food sources, but deer can't eat all of those to begin with, and that's why they'll move and transition to other food sources. And what I find is that number 3 feeding of the day is their high quality food. Imagine they've been in their beds, the daylight area, away from that high quality food source all day. They've been feeding on sticks and twigs and shrub tips and hard regeneration and briars, acorns. They can't wait to go wash it all down with some good food and really fill up, kind of like our dinner time. So you have to remember that, kind of think about these in terms of the layering effect that food creates. And again, you find those layers, create those layers, and you're going to find good success. The food is the priority every single day, and that includes this daylight browse. If you have great food source you're hunting, but you have no cover for the deer, or no quality cover, it's all open hardwoods, for example, then why would the deer stay there during the day? They need browse. They need to feed twice a day. They're not going to feed on your plot out in the open 5 times in a 24-hour period, and certainly 3 times during the daylight, because that's how many times they're feeding during the daylight, and even if they're just getting up and moving 50 to 100 yards. So it all relates back to food. Your hunting success hinges on finding food and the patterns of deer that move to that food source and how that affects where deer bed. Again, if you don't find that food source, you're not going to have those bedding areas. So many people are searching for a buck bed on public land that's changing all the time, unless it's some pinpoint little marsh outside of ag fields in a small public land setting. on some island where there's no other place they can bed, and then it's a matter of getting in there first before someone else gets them. But everything boils back to food. So if you are looking for a buck bed, that buck is not going to be in that entire bedding area if he's not relating to that food on a daily basis. If you think about that, sets up your entire foundation of hunting success. You can hunt back by bedding areas for bucks to come back into them. You get in there in the early morning hours, wait for deer to come back to you. Like that island effect. Could be a great bench out on public land or a swamp edge, a transition of hardwood regeneration with swamp, lots of stem count where you have lots of growth and shrubs and bushes and cattails. But bottom line is you can get in there in the morning because you know they're feeding a quarter mile away somewhere else. I use this to my advantage in the UP of Michigan with all the bait piles. So public land hunters are throwing out bait. They're hunting within a couple hundred yards of the truck or vehicle because they can carry their bait there. They're a lot of times hunting in the same blind they have for decades. And it's pretty easy to get in a half mile, 3/4 mile, come in for the back door entrance, get into an area where there's no bait piles and wait for those deer to come back to you in the morning hours. You're getting in at a time where the deer are food focused all night on bait piles. You're getting back in their browse areas where they're bedding during the day. So that sets up an assemblage of stands where you can say, I could hunt deer here in the morning, and then I can flip around and hunt those deer as they're moving to food sources, whether it's on public or private land, in the evening. As long as you don't spook out the food source, then those bedding areas are going to stay consistent. What you find on public land is mature bucks will bed further away from those food sources because a lot of people are overhunting those food sources. The deer are hitting them in the middle of the night. That means they're even further away during the daylight, a half mile, 3/4, even a mile away. And they'll make that trek under the cover of darkness. And if you put yourself in that distance, wherever that expands out to from that food plot, then you'll find great morning stands around bedding areas and then afternoon stands that relate to food sources. Maybe a clear cut, maybe an apple tree, great white oak stand or a stand of white oaks in September, maybe a stand of red oaks in October or November. But find the food source and your hunting success will greatly expand. Now I want to show you something. This is something interesting. Well, those younger bucks and does will focus on that food every day. They can be pushed around. They'll tolerate a lot of stress because if that's a quality food source, they don't want to leave. Does have a fraction of a home range of mature bucks. Now, yearling bucks, 1.5-year-old bucks, a fawn is not a yearling is not a fawn. A yearling is a 1.5-year-old buck. That's when they have their first set of antlers. They're willing to travel a little bit. They get kicked out of the herd. Their average dispersal is about 1.5 miles. But think of some of those big bucks, they might move 2-3 miles. And they have a big home range that they'll consistently seek. And what happens is if this food source right here, if this entire system gets X'd out because it's overpressured, these does and fawns, they'll stay around. They take a lot of stress. So they're very because you'll see them and maybe that buck will come back during the rut, but I don't want to rely on a random chance. I want to go find quality places to hunt. So what you'll find, these mature bucks right up here, let's say there's another food source over here, it's minor, but it's hidden. So hidden food in November, December, doesn't matter if it's private or public, that buck right there, he leaves this area. He, during the summer, will travel to these areas. He knows what's going on in each area. The older he gets, he has those hidden food sources that he knows about. And you'll find more of a barbell movement where you have a mature buck in this area, you have a mature buck in this food focused area, and then he spends very little time in between. He'll go find that food. It doesn't matter if it's 1 mile or 2 away. If this one gets stressed out, this one's overhunted, he'll move to this one down here. Mature bucks do that, does do not. So you have to always remember that in the food focus of a whitetail every single day, while does and fawns can be deceiving and they can stand around and tolerate a lot of stress and they'll stick close to that quality food source, those bucks are always searching. So those are some of the places I like to hunt. You might have a giant clear cut on public land. Well, what about a small stand of white oaks that's very remote, or even a swamp edge with a lot of diversity that meets a hillside with maybe some hardwood regeneration, maybe south-facing, so there's a little bit more growth and you're getting more exposure to the sun. Doesn't mean that they bed there, but it certainly means they feed there. That's why a lot of sheds are there. But he's willing to travel a long ways. Number 4 here, always follow the food. It's a great deer hunting tactic. So many people look at this in reverse. Again, you can look for deer beds all summer long, early fall. You can even go in December. January, February, March, which doesn't necessarily translate into what's going on during the deer season, especially October, November, December, early December. Into February, March, deer might be yarded together and very limited food sources, and mature bucks might be there. They might even leave some sign in the third rut in early January. But bottom line is that they're there because of that food source in February, March, which may not be an indication of where they are in October, November. You follow the food in deer hunting, then you'll find bedding areas. But if you're looking for bedding areas without establishing that food source first, then you're really putting the cart before the horse. You're really looking at it backwards. Again, you can't create a buck bed that'll attract every buck in the area, because bucks bed by food and that proximity to food and that relation to food, and that relation to that food source. And then you have to figure in that daytime browse. Is there enough browse? Do they have that hardwood regeneration that they crave? Woody shrub tips, more of an average quality that's there all the time. And they have southern Ohio areas, there's a lot of greenbrier. Deer feed on greenbrier almost year round. It's a plentiful food source that's everywhere. And so that's a quality food source during the day, but that's not what drives a deer herd or the foundation of movement on a daily basis. They're looking for higher quality. It might be an adjoining private land that has a golf course, an ag field, food plots, private land, people baiting in Ohio. He might be focusing on that for his afternoon food source, and he's back in some greenbrier top during the day. You have to establish that distance. So that's why I went back to 100 yards, 200 yards, 300 yards plus for mature bucks. But if you start associating that distance from that food source, then you're going to establish not only where deer is feeding, not only where he's traveling, but certainly where he's bedding. But it all starts with the food. Think about that as you're going in, you're scouting your next favorite place on public land, you're building a great property on private land. If you use the foundation of food as your guide, you're going to find success. And always remember, great cover and great habitat without a quality food source is dead. On private land, if you have great habitat, you're practicing TSI, working on the timber, and you don't have food plots, might be great if no one else in the neighborhood is working on their habitat and not planting food plots. The second someone puts a food plot a mile away on private land, they can make it so you don't see any mature bucks during the daylight, because they're all food focused. If they're doing a good job of managing their hunting pressure, then those bucks are going to gravitate over to that food source, that food plot. The bucks, among all other deer, mature bucks, they're craving quality food and they're willing to travel for it. Private land, food sources are always changing. So those white oak acorn locations, I can think of a spot, the southwest facing slope in southern Ohio. Great stand of white oaks for September. But once those are gone, they're on red oak somewhere, they're on private land, they're on a clear cut, but they're away from that stand of white oak. So you'll go in there, there's tons of sign, the rubs, scrapes, early season sign, you get really excited. But after that food dries up, guess what? Those bucks leave, and again, they're willing to travel for it. Find the food, find mature bucks, find where they're bedding for morning stands, find where they're feeding for evening stands, and now you have the entire assemblage of how to hunt and place your stands and where to focus on. And again, it starts with food, not bedding areas, this fall and every fall that you hunt beyond. Well, I'm real excited, folks. I appreciate you watching this video, but my next web class, How to Plant Food Plots, How to Design Your Food Plot Program, is out. And it really goes through a step-by-step process for not only how to plant your food plots, but why you should plant them, where you should plant them, what you should plant, how you should create them. There's a lot of different modules. Ends up about 30 videos altogether. I urge you to check that out. We're out here completing our food plot work today, and we do that in a pretty strict pattern so we can find success this fall. Food plots shouldn't be a guessing game. Take the guesswork out of food plots and food plots planting, and check out the web classes. I have my How to Design Your Whitetail Property, the food plots for the next web class in the series, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope you check it out, and let me know what you think if you end up purchasing that, and I think you'd be well pleased that you did.